Richard takes the extremist position that Jesus of Nazareth never even existed, that there was no such person in history. This is a position which is so extreme that to call it marginal would be an understatement. It doesn't even appear on the map of contemporary New Testament scholarship.
Oh, here we go. Javi's asking, do you believe in the historical Jesus? That's a good question.
Yeah, I was thinking about writing a book about this because I get the question a lot, and I unfortunately get quoted as someone who thinks that Jesus didn't exist, which I think is really very strange because I've written an entire book on what Jesus said and did.
Okay.
and for him to say and do anything, he had to exist. So I don't think there's any serious historian who doubts the existence of Jesus. There are a lot of people who want to write sensational books and make a lot of money who say Jesus didn't exist, but I don't know any serious scholar who doubts the existence of Jesus. And so absolutely. I mean, I've spent 30 years looking at this is what I do for a living. So it isn't just kind of an off-the-cuff kind of comment. This is, I've been examining this evidence for 30 years, reading this stuff in the original languages. So it's not like some crazy person who just wants to make money on a book. I mean, this is what I do for a living, and I can just tell you that everybody who's looked at this thing seriously, there's nobody who doubts this. We have more evidence for Jesus than we have for almost anybody from his time period. So, I mean, I'm not saying this as a believer. I'm not a believer. But as a historian, I'm just saying that you can't just kind of dismiss it and say, well, we don't know. I mean, you have to look at the evidence. So there is hard evidence.
But right away, I want to talk about the historicity of Jesus, because some people, notably those who are sort of a new atheist bent, might say something along the lines of, well, we don't know if Jesus even existed. Or they might say, Jesus, if he existed, and then they'll go on and say something about him. But what do you, as an historian specializing in this area, have to say when you hear that sort of assertion?
Well, anybody who is using that argument is simply flaunting his ignorance. I hate to say it, but it's about that bad. We have more documentation on Jesus Christ than anybody in the ancient world as far as that's concerned. There is no question whatever in the mind of any serious scholar anywhere in the world that there certainly was a historical personality named Jesus of Nazareth. Now, you can argue about whether he was the Son of God or not. You can argue about the supernatural aspects of his life. But in terms of the historical character, there is absolutely no evidence to the contrary, and all the evidence is in the favor. And I just can't stand the computer blogs and so many other would-be authorities trying to use this argument. He's only a myth. He never lived. Well, that's simply ridiculous on the face of the facts.
Well, I mean, you can always make pejorative-type responses on a question like this, but I would say with very, very few exceptions, virtually no scholar doubts or denies that Jesus existed. Now, I can think of a couple. G.A. Wells, but he's out of his field. He's a professor of German, but he's well known for this view. And a philosopher, Michael Martin, who even acknowledges, he says, since this is a very unpopular position, he said, I will not use it in my work. So they even acknowledge, Martin in particular, acknowledges the paucity of professors who take this view. And when I say critical scholars, I'm talking about scholars who have terminal degrees in a area that's important. They have peer-reviewed publications, and this is the area, historical Jesus, miracles, resurrection. This is the area they work in. And from that group, you can go to historical Jesus people, you go to Jesus seminar people, you can go to the left of Jesus seminar people. You almost never hear a doubt voiced about the historical existence of Jesus.
The new atheists profess to be interested in evidence, but their attitude to the figure of Jesus tells a very different story. Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, and indeed Victor Stenger, whom I debated in Sydney this week, believe that the existence of Jesus is in scholarly dispute. The eminent classicist Professor Graham Clark of the ANU, not a Christian, writes, frankly, I know of no ancient historian who would have a twinge of doubt about the existence of Jesus Christ. The documentary evidence is simply overwhelming. Clearly, the new atheists didn't check, at least with historians, but they did check with some other people. In The God Delusion, Dawkins quotes a certain Professor Wells. Stenger quoted him to me the other night. But neither Dawkins or Stenger tell us that Wells is a professor of German in London. What would Dawkins think, I wonder, if I got my information on biology from a professor of Mandarin?